Instead, the undemocratic leadership of another country would make those decisions. Security would no longer be based on people and their rights, but on the projections of power of the regimes of neighboring countries. In Europe, we are faced with an important decision. The choice is between Yalta and Helsinki, between spheres of interest and the use of force, or the sovereignty of states and common rules and principles. In Finland, the choice is crystal clear. We want to continue building a Europe relying on common rules and principles through dialogue and cooperation. We also have to walk the talk and take action. In Europe, we must defend these principles in everything we do. Breaches of common principles must not be tolerated, and aggression must be responded to. At the same time, we must ensure that the response to aggression does not violate the principles even further. Threats to democracy must not be countered with undemocratic means. The rules-based multilateral order is challenged globally as well. An increasing number of world leaders want to manage their affairs bilaterally and through ad hoc minilateral arrangements, transactionally. The threshold for the use of force has become lower, and the line between war and peace has become increasingly blurred. The civilians in Gaza, Sudan, and many other places are paying too high a price for this breakdown in the rules-based world order. We must also defend the multilateral order and established rules and principles globally, not only here in Europe. Even though the Helsinki Final Act was signed by states, perhaps its most significant achievements were gained through people and their cooperation. An increased understanding of fundamental human rights, and a willingness to build dialogue with people on the other side of the Iron Curtain, were the key contributors to the Cold War ending peacefully. I believe that now and in the future, people, cooperation, and dialogue will continue to lie at the core of European security. This conference and the extensive representation from different NGOs whom I have met today and will continue to meet, reflect the commitment of Finland to develop European security at various levels. We consider citizens and all representatives of civil society to be an essential part of European security as we go forward. I hope that everyone taking part in this conference will find a meaningful way to engage in the discussions in the spirit of Helsinki. Even though the world has changed significantly in 50 years, the same rules still apply to basic human interaction. The best solutions can be found through dialogue and listening to one another. Joint solutions are harder to find, but they are also much more sustainable. Dear friends, exactly 50 years ago, here at the Finlandia Hall, President Urho Kekkonen noted that, and I quote, "Acknowledging existing facts does not mean submitting to the weaknesses of the present situation." End of quote. I agree. Accepting the facts as they are is the starting point of improving the situation. We all have a role in foreign policy. We all have agency in foreign policy. I encourage everyone to think about and envision what a new common future would look like. I wish you a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next, it is my great pleasure to welcome our next keynote speaker, the President of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky. He will be addressing us online through a video connection, and as you know how video connections are, we need to give it a little time. So let's give a moment to establish the connection before we start listening to the President. Okay, Mr. President, the floor is yours.
Hundreds of Shaheed drones and also missiles. Our air defense shot down many of them, but not all, unfortunately. Once again, a Russian missile hit a residential building. A whole section of the building was turned into rubble and dust, just like the lives of the people who lived there. Across Kiev, dozens of people were injured in today's attack. There are fatalities, and sadly, the number of deaths is still rising. 2 days ago, Russia launched another cynical strike, this time on a prison in the Zaporizhzhia region. They used their dropped bombs. They knew exactly it was a civilians. They knew the bombs would hit it. 16 people were killed, 43 were injured. Russia keeps launching such attacks even when the whole world is calling on it to stop the war. A war that Russia started, a war that Russia keeps dragging on. A war that only the Russian leadership wants a leadership stuck in another era. They are mentally stuck in another century, a time of brutal violence, devastations, total disregard for human rights and equality. We all know such ideas and such times must never return to Europe. And we all know how to protect ourselves from that, how to protect Europe from what today's Russia is bringing. And I believe Russia can be pushed to stop this war. It started it, and it can be made to end it. But if the world doesn't aim to change the regime in Russia, that means even after the war ends, Moscow will still try to destabilize neighboring countries. It will keep spending huge amounts of money, resources, maybe even lives to do so. One of Putin's main ideas, now it's mainstream in Russia, is that Russia has no that its borders are wherever it wants them to be. This is a total rejection of the post-World War II world. And this is the foundation of the current regime in Russia. And we in Europe will have to protect ourselves from this in the long term, and we will protect ourselves. And yes, Russia has seized a vast amount of land, not just recently, but over centuries of imperial expansion and aggression. But its real potential is far smaller than Europe's. Russia's technologies are worse. And most importantly, unlike Europe, Russia offers no way of life that people want to follow. That's why it will lose. Our main task is to stop Russia now and to do everything we can to grow our shared strengths in security, in economy, in technology, in social development. I'm grateful to everyone applying sanctions against Russia and preparing new ones. And we need to fully block Russia's war machine, cut off its arms industry, limit its energy profits, and finally put every frozen Russian asset, including the stolen wealth of corruption, to work defending against Russian aggression. It's time to confiscate Russian assets, not just freeze them, confiscate them and use them to serve peace, not war. I want to thank President Stubb for standing with Ukraine, for supporting our people, and for helping build a connection with President Trump. President Trump is truly interested in ending the war, and we have to do everything we can to make sure the United States and Europe act together for security. I thank all European leaders, every country that helps our defense, our air shield, our resilience. Ukrainians have been through a lot because we stand together with everyone who values life. And I'm sure the day will come when Ukraine will live in real peace, a time when we will not wake up every night to air raid sirens, a time when we restore safety and constitutional order in the territory that are currently occupied, a time when Russia will be forced to recognize its real borders. That time will come because Europe stays united. Ukraine is not alone, America is helping, and the world chooses life, not war. If we look back at the choice made in Helsinki 50 years ago, it was also a choice for life, not war. Thank you for your support. Please keep putting pressure on Russia for the sake of peace and invest in your own security. Slava Ukraini! Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Zelensky, for these heartfelt words. And now our next keynote speaker is United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is delivering his speech via a video message.
I'm pleased to send my warm greetings as you gather to mark the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. I commend the OSCE Chair, Finland, for its leadership in convening this anniversary event. Half a century ago, the Helsinki Final Act charted a bold and visionary course for peace, rooted in dialogue, grounded in international law, and anchored in the fundamental rights and freedoms of all people. This year also marks the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter. The principles of our Charter and the OSCE are a shared foundation for peace and cooperation. But today those principles are under grave strain. War continues to rage in the European continent. Trust between states is fraying. Human rights are under assault. Democratic space is shrinking. And disinformation is fueling division and fear. We are witnessing a dangerous drift away from commitments that have safeguarded peace for generations. Yet, in this moment of peril, the values enshrined in the UN Charter and echoed in the Helsinki Final Act, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and peaceful coexistence, remain our moral and strategic compacts. The role of the OSCE as a platform for dialogue and guardian of these principles is more vital than ever. The United Nations stands firmly with the OSCE in defending shared values, dialogue over division, cooperation over confrontation, and dignity for all. Let us recommit to the spirit of Helsinki by strengthening regional partnerships to renew multilateralism, by principled leadership to uphold international law, and by forging unity of purpose to build a future of mutual respect, resilience, and shared prosperity. Let us honor the milestone by renewing our commitment to a world anchored in peace, justice and human rights. Thank you, and my very best wishes for a successful meeting.
Thank you, Secretary General Guterres. Now I welcome to the stage our next speaker, OSCE Secretary General, Ambassador Feridun Siniliolu. Please, Secretary General, the floor is yours.
President Stubb, Minister Valtonen, I thank you for your invitation to Helsinki. Excellencies, dear friends, being here in the very same room 50 years after our forefathers and foremothers, one could be tempted to talk about the past. Therefore, I am sure that we will continue to hear a lot today about what the Helsinki Final Act meant when it was signed. I hope that we will also hear about the successes of the Helsinki Final Act, an example of how adversaries, allies, neighbors, as well as countries with little in common, came together to agree on the fundamental principles that would guide their peaceful and prosperous coexistence. I hope that we will hear about the transformative powers of the Helsinki Final Act more. How little more than 1 year after the Helsinki Summit, Charter 77 promised to initiate a new era of civil liberties and freedoms, and how it was followed by many other movements that helped to expand and strengthen the democratic space on the continent. I hope we will hear about all that, because I am not going to talk about it. Today, rather than to talk about the Helsinki Final Act with my eyes on the past, I want to look to the future and talk about the next 50 years, the future security architecture that will ensure a better and safer order for our children and grandchildren. Together we are navigating through an increasingly difficult and uncertain period. Our collective security architecture, which our founding fathers and mothers built over decades of hard work, with sometimes a high cost, is in shambles before us. The current state of our fundamental norms and principles is the biggest challenge in front of us today. Once rules do not matter to some, they won't matter for anyone, and that becomes a problem for everyone. This cannot be the new normal. Therefore, when it comes to principles, they should be applied to everyone, inside and outside of the OSCE region, period. Selectively applying rules and exceptions erodes international law. We must stand against aggression everywhere it is perpetrated, by whomever it is perpetrated. We must stand against genocide and war crimes in every context. We must combat impunity before it takes root. Double standards are eroding the fundamental principles that are our foundation. We need to be able to rely on them. The 50 years of work from the OSCE and the 80 years of work from the United Nations is all being undermined. We see across the OSCE region desecration of or dismantlement of monuments, religious symbols, and even cemeteries. If we want to build solid foundations for the next 50 years of peaceful coexistence, history needs to be learned, not rewritten. Excellencies, dear friends, yesterday, Pope Leo renewed his appeal for peace in the world and stated the following, and I quote, "Today, more than ever, it is imperative to cherish the spirit of Helsinki, persevere in dialogue, strengthen cooperation, and make diplomacy the preferred way to prevent and resolve conflicts." End of quote. If there is one lesson that we can draw from this reference to the spirit of Helsinki, is this: dialogue is always possible. The only prerequisite to dialogue is a space to exercise that. You, the participating states, have created that. It was designed here in Helsinki in 1975. It was built on in the following decades. You have created by consensus the OSCE to hold that space. Now is the time to use it, to invest in it, to utilize it as a platform for meaningful, open, transparent, and structured diplomatic dialogue. Now more than ever before, we need this platform to address the many challenges facing the participating states and the partners for cooperation. However, dialogue requires both talking and listening. That's engagement. It is unfortunate that today there appears to be very little appetite for engagement. Yes, people are speaking, but talking past each other or talking across each other is not the same as speaking with each other. If you want a real conversation, you have to listen and hear each other as well. That's why it is high time to return to the meaningful, respectful engagement envisaged by our forefathers and foremothers here 50 years ago. Let us recall that this organization was born at a time when the threat of mutually assured destruction was at the fore of everyone's mind. Frankly, these capabilities have only increased since 1975, and their presence continues to pose a global existential threat. Therefore, to use a reference to them as a threat is unacceptable. Hence, to forego engagement is to play with fire. Security cannot and will never be guaranteed by military deterrence alone, because military deterrence alone can lead to an arms race and be destabilizing. Therefore, security must also be ensured through cooperation, which requires dialogue. That is the living legacy of Helsinki. Excellencies, dear friends, this anniversary should serve as a brief reflection moment, a moment to pause before we reach the precipice and redirect our course towards building a new security architecture that will once again serve us all. In order to do that, I will say this again, I believe we need three crucial steps. First, we need to end the wars. Of course, when it comes to the OSCE region, that first and foremost means in Ukraine. We have seen in recent weeks and months glimmers of diplomatic engagements for a ceasefire. It is our duty to support efforts towards a negotiated settlement to end the war and encourage the sides to continue meeting and agree on further confidence-building measures, including the release of prisoners and repatriation of Ukrainian children. In this regard, I want to stress once again publicly my call that these initiatives should include our three OSCE officials, Vadim Golda, Maxim Petrov, and Dmitry Shabanov. After 3 years, their families continue to endure unspeakable anguish and pain and deserve to hold their loved ones again, as do far too many families of prisoners. Secondly, we need to recommit to the fundamentals. Our shared Helsinki principles must continue to live and guide us through these difficult times. I cannot imagine a stable and reliable security system in our geography and beyond, where fundamental ideas like sovereign equality and territorial integrity of states or respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms are not at the core. We need to vigorously recommit to the principles we place as the foundation of the UN Charter and the Helsinki Final Act. And then we need to actively implement them every day in every way we can. We need these principles, and we need the house we built to defend them. That is, we need the OSCE. Thirdly, we need an honest discussion on how we got here, what went wrong. And I repeat, honest discussions. When a system crumbles in the manner that we are witnessing right now, there needs to be some soul-searching, an open-minded review to investigate the reasons for collapse, We all bear responsibility for mistakes, misinterpretations, hubris, and indeed silence. A meaningful security discussion will need to include an honest assessment of what we did wrong, what we condoned, we should not have, and what we underestimated. We need to go through that together and listen to each other. Excellencies, dear friends, globally and in Europe, we have reached a critical juncture. The choices we make in the coming weeks and months will determine what the world of our future generations will look like. 50 years ago, despite our differences and our conflicted interests, we came together and found a common ground. There is no doubt that today's geopolitical situation is challenging, but geography has not changed and will not change. 50 years ago, there was a recognition of what was needed, a security platform for mutual accountability, dialogue, and collective action in Europe. We still need that today. And mark my words, we will need it for the next 50 years. This platform is the OSCE. Let us make full use of it. The alternative would be an affront to the men and women who made history in this very room 50 years ago. The alternative would be an affront to the women and men who will stand in this room 50 years from now. I thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. Our next speaker is United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Volker Türk. Mr. Türk, welcome to the stage.
Mr. President, Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear friends. It is obviously a very great pleasure to be here with you today in the beautiful and warm city of Helsinki to mark this important anniversary. And I'm particularly moved to be in the very hall where the Helsinki Final Act was signed 50 years ago. Today, amid conflict and crisis, as the world seems more fragmented than ever, I pay tribute to the leaders of the time from East and West who came together to sign the Helsinki Final Act here in 1975. Helsinki has a special meaning for me. I spent my childhood in Vienna and Linz in Austria in the shadow of the Iron Curtain. The border between Austria and Czechoslovakia at the time was just 30 kilometers from my home. It is difficult for young Europeans to imagine how I was haunted by the barbed wire fence, the watchtowers, the guards, and the guns. Even as a small child, I knew people who had been killed trying to cross the border. And as I grew up, I understood that this eerie no man's land embodied a much bigger threat. I would often wake up at night, anxious about the possibility of nuclear war. When I heard the song Russians by Sting, calling for a common sense on either side of the political fence, I pictured that border. Finally, someone was talking about the simple human emotions that override ideological differences. In 1985, when Sting recorded Russians, the Helsinki process was 10 years old and its influence was growing. The spirit of Helsinki encouraged openness and cooperation. States started to inform each other about troop movements and military exercises, but its most important principle, what it set apart from other treaties, was that the Helsinki Final Act recognized a comprehensive concept of security, including a human dimension that goes far beyond an absence of war. The Helsinki spirit put human rights, civil, political, economic, social and cultural, at the heart of peace and security. It provided a path out of ideological divisions and towards greater freedoms. Freedoms of thought, of expression, of peaceful assembly, of movement, and the right to leave and return to one's own country. It gave hope to human rights defenders and dissidents across Europe, and it focused on ways to unite rather than divide. The Helsinki process played an important role during the end of the Cold War. It was a platform for dialogue based on mutual respect and clear channels of communication. As the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe was transformed into the OSCE in 1990, the cause of advancing human rights was the golden thread that brought its participating states together. Since 1990, the OSCE has played an important role in promoting stability in Europe through its work in the Western Balkans, in Transnistria and in the Caucasus. You have helped strengthen democracy, advance cooperation and promote comprehensive security by encouraging, for instance, dialogue among parliaments. Your role in observing elections has helped make them fairer and more trustworthy. Your field operations and institutions, the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, the High Commission on National Minorities, the Representative on Freedom of the Media, play a vital part in the human rights ecosystem in the vast area stretching between Vancouver and Vladivostok. And now, 50 years after the Helsinki Final Act, powerful forces are at work, undermining multilateralism, flouting international law, and attacking global institutions and frameworks that were painstakingly created over decades for the benefit of all. This anniversary is indeed an opportunity to revitalize the Helsinki spirit and work for dialogue and solidarity as the foundation of peace and security in Europe and around the world. Today's theme, Respecting the Legacy, Preparing for the Future, calls on us not only to celebrate the enduring achievements of the Helsinki Final Act, but to apply their lessons to the challenges of today and tomorrow. My office and the OSCE have a very strong partnership through regular meetings and consultations. We share profound concerns around issues from conflict prevention to media freedom, gender equality, human trafficking, freedom of expression, the human rights impact of the climate crisis, and the protection of the rights of minorities. The human rights at the heart of the Helsinki process are a roadmap and a compass to rebuild trust and guide us towards solutions. Human rights are a factor of stability and resilience, and I welcome Finland's emphasis on resilience during its chairpersonship of the OSCE. In our turbulent times, amid levels of uncertainty and volatility, human rights are the voice of reason and compassion. They counterbalance the empty salutary of some of today's leaders and constrain the abuse of power. Human rights give us the self-confidence to confront prejudice and to right historic wrongs. And they are a tool for systemic, sustained change that benefits everyone. And I see three areas for our joint focus in the coming years. First, respect for human rights helps to prevent conflict and mitigate its impact on civilians. The root causes of conflict often lie in inequalities and human rights violations and are fueled by dehumanization, discrimination, shrinking civic space, and the targeting of minorities. We see these dynamics today in Gaza, in Sudan, and elsewhere. We need to invest much more at the national and global levels in heeding early warnings and in building peace by investing in dialogue and confidence-building measures. Human rights also show the way out of conflict by insisting on accountability, by putting people at the center of mediation and peace building. My office is working for these goals around the world. Our work raises the alarm bells, helps to prevent abuses and violations, and documents them when they take place. And I would like to give you two examples. In Ukraine, we have detailed the appalling cost of Russia's full-scale invasion, which has escalated this year with a serious increase in civilian casualties, as we have just heard also from the President. My office has verified repeated patterns of torture and the cruel and inhuman treatment of Ukrainian prisoners in Russian captivity. We also continue to report on Russia's illegal imposition of its governance system in the territory it occupies and on the climate of fear created by widespread human rights violations there. But I also want to mention the occupied Palestinian territory, where after the horrific 7 October attacks committed by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups, our reporting has kept a spotlight on the huge number of civilians, deaths in the Israeli bombardments of Gaza, the repeated forced displacement, the unlawful restrictions imposed on the entry and distribution of humanitarian aid, the killings of people seeking food, and attacks and harassments of Palestinians by Israeli settlers and security forces in the occupied West Bank. It is clear that that war must also end. The hostages must be released. Israel must end its unlawful presence, and there must be accountability for all violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law. We are on the ground in many other situations. I've only mentioned two: Sudan, Myanmar, Haiti, and beyond. And this detailed, meticulous work that shines a light on abuses and violations that would otherwise remain hidden. The second area for our joint focus, human rights, provides a lens to tackle the big issues of our time, such as the climate crisis, and protect people from its impact. When we look to the future, we know the climate crisis will be one of our biggest multiplier of security risks, especially around competition for water and other scarce resources. The extraction and burning of fossil fuels are trapping humanity in a furnace, and the countries and people that contributed least to global heating are suffering its worst effects. Human rights call for justice. Those responsible for the climate crisis need to pay up. And we need new creative sources to fund climate action and a serious reform of the global financial architecture so that all countries can access finances they need. The recent advisory opinion issued last week by the International Court of Justice on the obligations of states regarding climate change affirms what many of us have long argued. Governments have a clear human rights obligation under international law to address the climate crisis. Third, respect for human rights is the best guarantee for progress in every society. Creativity and innovation are not possible without free speech, dissent, the right to peaceful protest, academic freedoms, and respect for science. But today, more and more governments in every region are cracking down on these freedoms. It is frightening to see that the tools of repression are back with a vengeance, in places we would never have expected to see them. Human rights activists, lawyers, journalists, civil society groups are threatened, harassed, targeted by disinformation, and some governments are also using new technologies to reach across borders to intimidate, to abduct, and even kill opponents and critics. Meanwhile, poorly regulated social media platforms are silencing some people and communities. Women and girls, people with disabilities, and minorities of all kinds suffer disproportionate harassment and abuse online. We need an open public space for debate, which is backed by free and independent media. And I welcome Finland's decision to prioritize gender equality, inclusion, and engagement with civil society, as the Minister just mentioned. So 50 years on, this is an important opportunity to revive the Helsinki spirit and the principles of the OSCE. The need for cross-border cooperation on building sustainable peace and security and protecting all human rights has never been greater. For the world to move forward together in peace, we must heed the lessons of the past with Helsinki at their heart. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner, for your remarks. And now I'd like to welcome to the stage our next and last keynote speaker, Interim Executive Director of Human Rights Watch, Mr. Federico Borrello. Mr. Borrello, the floor is yours.
It will be hard to come after all these speakers, but I'll do my best. Thank you, President Stubb and Foreign Minister Valtonen, for the invitation to speak at this important event. It's wonderful and moving to be in Helsinki and to speak in the Finlandia Hall, the very place where the Helsinki Final Act was signed 50 years ago. I'm grateful to you, Foreign Minister Valtonen, for bringing us together to reflect on the past and think about the future. We also appreciate your steadfast focus on human rights during this year chairing the OSCE, especially, as you have just said, as Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine continues to challenge the very foundation of our common security. This event is special for me and my colleagues at Human Rights Watch. For us, this milestone is not just an important reminder of a key set of principles that shape human rights in Europe. It is much more, as the Helsinki Accords and what followed are part of the DNA of our organization. As we know, it was the focus of the Accords on human rights that drew special attention at the time. All participating states committed to, and I quote, respect human rights and fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief for all. The Soviet Union was among those that embraced the Accords, at least on paper. They were published in full into major media outlets there, Pravda and Izvestia. Many Soviet citizens decided to take their government at their word, with a simple and courageous act of standing up for their rights. Meetings were held, pamphlets were written and shared. Despite the obvious dangers, activists formed into groups using the label Helsinki as a sign of hope and a shield for protection. The Moscow-Helsinki group, for instance, was formed only a few months after the signing in this hall, shortly followed by other Helsinki groups in Soviet Ukraine, Lithuania, and Georgia. Almost immediately, Soviet authorities started harassing and arresting group members, even driving them into exile. Thankfully, the actions of these courageous citizens did not go unnoticed. In New York, a group of lawyers, journalists, and writers was so inspired they set up their own Helsinki Watch to shed light on human rights abuses in the Soviet Union, put it on the agenda of the US government, and be in solidarity with the Helsinki groups there. It is this Helsinki Watch, this group of men and women in New York, that has over almost 50 years evolved into the global organization that is now Human Rights Watch. The idea of a spirit of Helsinki was discussed after the conference in this hall 50 years ago. It has been mentioned again today. For me, the spirit of Helsinki means that the Accords are a guarantee of a right to speak the facts and uphold everyone's human rights, particularly when citizens are under pressure to do the opposite, to shut up and to not resist. So what does such an understanding mean in practice, today and in the future? For me, it underlines three things: the essential link between security and human rights, the universality of human rights, and the importance of the OSCE being a resilient organization able to help protect human rights in the future. First, there is no doubt about the seriousness of the security situation in Europe. As we have heard, Russia commits war crimes and other violations of the laws of war on a regular, almost daily basis in Ukraine. As the Finnish chairpersonship has emphasized, accountability for these crimes is vital to deter future aggression, to deliver justice for victims, and not least, to bolster international humanitarian norms for the security of all in the OSCE and beyond. The connection between security and human rights has many dimensions. Some OSCE participating states appear to be making concerning trade-offs, prioritizing security over human rights, and making deep cuts in social spending in order to increase military budgets. These are false dichotomies. As we know, the OSCE's concept of a human dimension of security depends on respect for human rights and the democratic institutions that protect them. In addition, at this time of heightened questions and tensions about the international political order, we need a renewed commitment to international norms and treaties, rather than a retreat from them. This includes safeguarding the standards adopted to prevent civilian suffering in war. We have followed with concern how 5 EU members, sadly including our host country Finland, are withdrawing from the landmark international treaty prohibiting anti-personnel landmines. While we understand the security concerns, walking away from the convention will put their own civilians and others at risk, and not just in times of war. And this is why we urge these governments to reconsider this step. Second, the focus of the Helsinki Accords on the universality of human rights. The rising human rights violations across the OSCE region are alarming. I spoke about the crackdown that happened 50 years ago against courageous activists in the Soviet Union. In the post-Soviet era, the Kremlin's pressure on critical voices inside Russia has never been fiercer than today. Further, in Central Asia, Belarus, and Azerbaijan, abuses of fundamental rights are widespread and in some areas escalating. In Georgia, government repression against the political opposition, civil society, and protesters is rapidly worsening. In Turkey, the government is carrying out a fully fledged assault on the political opposition, civil society, and the media. And rights are under pressure elsewhere too. Hungary's government has hollowed out democracy with curbs on judicial independence, media freedom, and civic space. The new US government appears to be on a similar path. Civil society space and the right to protest are under serious pressure in many parts of Western Europe, especially for those protesting climate change and standing up for Palestine. Media freedom faces threats too. We just published a report about the shocking interference by the Greek government in editorial decisions in public media and pressure on independent journalists. These efforts have one thing in common. They chip away at checks and balances on executive power and in turn put human rights at risk. And they send a signal to other states that such actions are acceptable, maybe even the new norm. And that runs counter to the spirit of the Helsinki Final Act. Participant states need to act decisively to stop these abuses. As part of this, they need to focus on supporting civil society. This means opposing legislation such as foreign agents laws that stigmatize independent civil activism, protecting civil space and funding for civil society organizations, and valuing, not prosecuting, human rights defenders. In this context, we thank the Finnish government for announcing that supporting civil society is a focus of the new Helsinki Plus 50 fund being launched today. Third, we need a strong OSCE to reinforce human rights protection in our region. Participating states should be bold in using the tools at their disposal to bring human rights abusers to account, and to signal that the accords on which this organization was built still apply to all. We need the OSCE's independent structures now more than ever. The Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, the Representative on Freedom of the Media, and the High Commissioner on National Minorities have renowned and urgently needed expertise. They do vital work, and they deserve continued support. To end, the challenges we face today are no less serious than the ones we faced 50 years ago. Let's use this occasion to pull together, to defend our rights and freedoms, to strengthen democratic institutions and norms, to be ambitious and rise to the challenge we have received from those who, in the spirit of Helsinki, responded bravely to the accords signed here 50 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Borrello, and thank you again to all our keynote speakers. You have delivered us many important messages and many inspiring thoughts around the Helsinki Final Act and its meaning today. And this concludes our keynote session. Before moving to our first panel discussion, we want to hear something from you, dear participants, both here on the spot and online. For that purpose, I now ask everyone to please take out your phones. On the screen behind me, you can see a QR code. Please scan the code with your camera. This will allow you to access our online platform through which you will be able to participate in the discussions today. If you have now scanned the code, you should be able to see this question on your mobiles. While you are pondering what to answer and answering, let me inform you that during the panel discussions you will also have different kinds of opportunities to engage in the discussion through this online platform. During the first panel, you can submit written comments and questions for the panel that then will be partly used in the panel. So please finalize your answers to the first questions as we will now move on with the program. And now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage our first panel. The theme of the panel is respect, how to strengthen respect for the foundational principles of European security. I welcome to the stage our moderator, Mr. Steven Sacker, and our panelists, OSCE Chairperson in Office, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Finland, Ms. Elina Valtonen, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Mr. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mongolia, Ms. Batsetsek Batmuch, Minister of State for Europe, North America and Overseas Territories of the United Kingdom, Mr. Stephen Dowdy, and President and CEO of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, Mr. Stefan Kapus. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, friends. It is my honor and privilege to be with you today. Let me just briefly introduce myself. I am Stephen Sacker. I've had a long career as a journalist, most of it with the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation. I've lived and worked in many different parts of the world, and throughout my career I have, in a sense, watched up close and personal the degree to which our world is adhering to the spirit of Helsinki. So for me, a chance to moderate a debate like this is particularly rewarding and important. We've got a terrific panel. You can see their names up there, but let me just greet them all with a little bit of eye contact. So Minister Valtonen, thank you so much for joining us. We also are joined, of course, by the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine, Mr. Sybiha, Andriy Sybiha. Thank you so much, Minister, for being here. We enjoyed the comments, very important words that we got live from Mr. Zelensky just a little earlier on. So we thank him too for being part of this morning's debate. Thank you so much to him.
I'm really surprised you pronounced my surname correctly.
Well,
You don't need to introduce yourself.
I tell you a little secret. On Hard Talk, when we were doing the interviews with officials and important people around the world, one of the most important questions I always ask the producer is how to pronounce the name. Because if you can't get the name right and show the respect at the very beginning, you have a problem. So I hope I can live up to my own words. Next to Minister Sabiha, we are delighted to be joined by Stephen Doughty, who is, I know well, the Minister of State for Europe in the UK government. I know you struggled to get here thanks to some problems with flights coming from the UK, but you made it. Well done for that. Next to Mr. Doughty, we've got Steve Kapus, who is President and CEO of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. A great pleasure to have you with us, Stephen. Thank you for joining us. And at the very end, it is a real delight to be able to welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mongolia, Ms. Batsitseg Batmunk. And we are really delighted to have you on our panel. Mongolia, in a sense, the youngest member of the OSCE membership, so it's really terrific to have you with us too. Thank you all for being with us. I should just say before we begin, as Mikko said, we want this to be interactive, so I'm going to kick off the debate, but using your QR code, you can supply questions to our panelists as well. Please use that facility because almost certainly your questions are going to be better than mine. So do that and help me out if you would. Now, just by way of beginning the debate, I was making a few notes in the keynotes that we had earlier. And of course, I'm a journalist. And so for me, events like this are in danger sometimes of being too reliant on platitudes and good thoughts that we can all agree with, and sometimes lack the candor and the frankness that allow us to get deep into the real issues behind the rhetoric. But today, I will be very honest and say I was refreshed by the degree of candor we heard from some of our keynote speakers. And in particular, I was struck by the words of the current Secretary General of the OSCE, who said, and I'm just looking at my own notes here, 50 years of OSCE work is in danger of being undone. Talk without listening and engaging is never enough. And he said, we need honest discussion about what has gone wrong over 50 years. So without being the journalist who always looks at the glass half empty rather than half full, I do want us to be as candid as possible in this discussion. And I'm going to start with you, Minister Valtonen. We can all, I think, acknowledge and accept that after 50 years, there is a problem for the OSCE. There is a fundamental problem that the spirit of Helsinki is not being upheld, and there appears to be a lack of respect for those important principles which underpin the Helsinki Final Act. How much do you believe there is a crisis facing the spirit of Helsinki today?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the very important question. Well, first of all, I would start off with my personal opinion, which is that at the end of the day, everything you measure is at the level of the people. So organizations come and go, and if the organization doesn't fulfill its purpose anymore for the benefit of the people, then why uphold it? I'm not saying this were the case for the OSCE. The OSCE is not just upholding the principles, but also carrying out valuable tasks all over, which we can talk about later. But I want to highlight a very important thing as well, and something we really need to, well, acknowledge is that, first of all, in the past 50 years, it is not the case that the rules-based order or the Helsinki Principles or the UN Charter would have been shattered. On the very contrary, actually in the past 50 years, the world has become so much freer for so many people, not all of them, unfortunately. There is war waging in Ukraine, but at least Ukrainians now have the possibility to really fight for their strong independence and democracy, which they didn't have 50 years ago. They were part of the oppressed, or in the oppressed regime.
No question. I mean, if you don't mind me keeping it sort of snappy and relatively brief, I totally get that. But if we are talking about an arc or a trajectory, one could say that, you know, after 1975, there was an astounding success of spreading sort of the Helsinki principles, which undermined and then saw the collapse of the Soviet communist system. And through the period around 1989, through the 90s, into the early 2000s, one could argue that the Helsinki spirit was not just alive and well, but was really meaningful. But everybody we've heard from in the keynotes has acknowledged that profound things have happened since then, which seem to take that arc in a more negative direction. And obviously, you know, February of 2022 represents a huge turning point. So I think we have to be realistic and talk about where we are now and accept, do we not, that in recent years things have gone badly wrong.
The war that Russia is waging against Ukraine is dead wrong. No question about it. But we should not take collective responsibility for somebody's wrong actions, because the Helsinki principles are fine and well. The Helsinki spirit is actually, you know, you can sense it in so many capitals in the European neighborhood, in countries who perhaps are not yet in the European Union or in NATO, or perhaps don't even want to be, but they want to be genuine democracies. Their people want that. That's the Helsinki spirit, and it's alive and kicking. And if there's one country or perhaps another aiding with a full-scale invasion, then it's their fault. I think it's extremely important that we are blunt and honest about who has the responsibility, and also don't forget about the accountability for what is happening, because it's been so many years, so many decades that the narrative went that, you know, the West did all, and they say NATO came too close to Russia. But NATO never threatened Russia. And, well, this is a little bit beyond besides the point, but what I'm saying is, yes, we have to ponder what has happened, what we need to reform, how to look into the future, but at the same time, we also need to be able to say that it is not our collective responsibility that Russia has attacked another country.
Indeed. Minister Sybiha, you've journeyed here from Kiev. You've obviously heard your president, Mr. Zelensky, address us earlier. Just a more general thought. We obviously, everybody in this room is mindful throughout the conversation of what is happening in your country today, but this debate has to be much broader than that. So I want you to be as broad as you can be. Coming from Kiev, but surveying Europe and the wider world, what is your perspective on the current state of respect for the principles that underpin the Helsinki Final Act?
Ukrainian people, Ukrainians now are paying the highest price to protect these values, to protect Helsinki principles. We heard 20 minutes ago speech of my president. Unfortunately, President, we must start every speech with the words, today Kyiv was under the attack. Today Ukraine was heavily attacked. Today we have casualties. Today several or many civilians, children were killed. What does it mean? It also means that OSCE failed, even failed in providing, in keeping its mission, which was established 50 years ago. That's also, by the way, the response, Putin's response, and the way he celebrates 50 years of Helsinki Act by heavy bombing Ukraine. And every morning you start by calling to your relatives and families, are you okay? And what is also very symbolic, at the beginning of this week, Moscow mechanism was invoked to help to investigate Moscow crimes against war prisoners. So it's difficult even to imagine Moscow mechanism to help to investigate Moscow crimes. It means degradation of this country, and of course degradation of security in Europe.
I want to stop you there and just very briefly ask you this. The OSCE is not an enforcement organization. You know, it's not NATO, and it never will be, and it never was intended to be. But it was intended to enshrine values and principles which could reach out people to people. And as we just heard from Federico, talking from the perspective of Human Rights Watch, there is no question that the ideas behind Helsinki reached people beyond the Iron Curtain in that period before 1989, and they did make a difference. Do you believe that the Helsinki principles still matter in that people-to-people sense, and that they reach people? Let's be specific. Do they reach people in the Belarus of today, the Russia of today? Do they still matter to people?
Yes, they do really matter. I could confirm you, and I want to give you one example. Last week, together with my colleague Jean-Noël, France's foreign minister, we visited Kharkiv, region which is close to front line. And he asked commander of one of the brigades, why are you protecting your country? Why are you protecting each piece of your country? Why are you protecting values which are important or which matters to all of us? And the answer was very simple, because our land, each piece of our land is priceless. And we protect our values because these values are in our DNA. Because of this act, also, these values became a part of our DNA, I mean, in this region. So that's why it is really important. Maybe we need more enforcement tools in OSCE, Maybe we need to have this philosophy, SOC, to prevent conflicts. That's our negative experience. We know, we have lesson learned. We need effective international mechanisms to prevent conflicts and wars. And one of the principal cooperations, and OSCE is an important platform, but what's important to understand, and that cooperation with those who threaten could be turned into a landmine. So definitely we need to protect these principles, but we need also amendments of to make this organization more functional.
More functional, more meaningful. Stephen Doughty, you joined us from London. You know, goodness knows, Britain has its own problems, but the relative comfort, you know, of representing the UK government, looking at much more troubled parts of the world from London. Does the OSCE matter to the UK government? Or, you know, you're ramping up your defense spending, you're committed to sort of rebuilding NATO alongside partners. Where does the OSCE fit into all of that?
It absolutely does matter, and it matters to me personally. In fact, actually, one of my first roles coming out of university was with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, working on issues from Ukraine to the Caucasus, and I saw the value of the organisation, the value that the work they did in election monitoring, the value of the work of ODIHR, the value of the work of the OSCE as an organisation. And it's also very important for me to be here. One of my predecessors as an MP for Cardiff South, Jim Callaghan, who was our Foreign Secretary at the time of the Helsinki Final Act, was in this very conference room 50 years ago. So the OSCE has always mattered to the United Kingdom and will continue to matter to the United Kingdom. And fundamentally, that is because of those very principles that are in the Decalogue. They are as valuable as they were back in 1975. And just because they are under threat, in this case primarily from Russia and what Russia has done to Ukraine in complete violation of those principles, but also many other examples and challenges, whether that's for minorities, whether that's for journalists, whether that's for civil society, they matter more than ever. But just because they're under threat doesn't mean we abandon those principles, we abandon an organisation. We don't abandon the United Nations because Russia has violated the UN Charter. It is more important than ever that we recommit to those principles and we show how we're going to implement them in practice.
But if we live in a world where, to be frank, many leaders, some in very powerful countries, appear to believe in the crude principle that might is right, then how does the OSCE have a meaningful role in that world? Which is clearly not the world that the Helsinki spirit is all about, but it is kind of the world that we currently appear to be living in.
But we've been through many challenging periods before, and one can look at the periods in the Balkans in the 1990s where those principles were under threat. Many other examples in that period since 1975, and it was because of the tenacity and the commitment of members in this room, of members of the OSCE who wanted to stand up for those principles that they'd signed up for. That the OSCE played a key role in many of those instances. It's also that role it plays in inspiring. We've touched on that in terms of young people that I've met in Kiev, young people that I've met, human rights defenders from around the continent, and those individuals that we engage with as a government on a regular basis. So that's why it was very important for me to be here, to recommit to those principles, and really want to commend Finland for the leadership that they've shown in bringing us here, and that commitment to those principles. But this ultimately is going to be about what we all do, and not just in the response to the illegal and barbaric war against Ukraine, but also on those other principles. And I can see some important questions coming up here on the screen. But the OSCE has a unique, often a quiet role, and often an understated role, but one that is absolutely necessary.
We will get to the questions, I promise you, because you've got the look of a man who thinks the questions on the screen are better than my questions.
Not at all.
We will get to them, but I do want everybody in the panel to have an opportunity to speak first. Steve Capers, if I may come to you, inevitably, and I think quite rightly, much of our discussion about respecting the Helsinki principles has kicked off with thoughts about the meaning of Russia's aggression against Ukraine and how we fit that into the current sort of thinking about the OSCE. But I don't want to do that with you because you come with a particular role. You've been heading up VOA. You're a man who thinks very hard about free media, free expression, about some of the cultural issues which underpin the spirit of Helsinki, fundamental freedoms to just air one's opinion and not be imprisoned or worse as a result. When you look around both the European space and beyond right now, do you feel that those elements of the Helsinki principles are under an increasing level of threat?
Yes, they are under threat. We've just had a journalist released recently from Crimea who spent more than 4 years there. Russia has unlawfully occupied Crimea going back to 2014. Our journalist was simply engaged as a blogger, telling the world what was going on in Crimea, and for that he was tortured in prison, he was forced to confess, and he spent 4 years behind bars. We have other journalists who are in prison as we speak, in Belarus, in Russia, in Azerbaijan, in Iran. We see governments still going to great lengths to try to silence us. And I would say all this focus on security and the defense of Europe is absolutely important. But without a very strong soft power component, without a commitment to allowing the free press to continue to operate without harassment, without intimidation, of course that's not going to just simply go away. But there is no true safety and security without these fundamental soft power tools. And that's not saying that we should become our own propagandists to battle against Russia's propaganda. They're spending billions on it, of course. But what we have to offer is the integrity that comes with the truth. And we've got to recommit to that. There can't be petty competitiveness among the public service media these days. OSCE has advocated for our imprisoned journalists, and they have advocated, I think it's time for all of us to advocate for adequate funding. And I'm saying that as somebody right now whose very organization is at threat because of that.
I need to ask you about that right now, because I think, again, there is a danger, I'm not saying any of us today are falling into the trap, but there is a danger of a set of assumptions of a self-satisfied group of people, you know, from the democratic West, if I can put it like that, sort of appearing to assume that everything is okay in their societies and looking at the failure to uphold Helsinki spirit and principles in other people's societies. We have our own problems, and in the United States, you are in the middle of what is a sort of politically tumultuous time in which the chief executive of your country is essentially eager to close down your operation, other public service media broadcasting operations, and also appears to regard many journalists as the enemy. I mean, he literally has called journalists enemies of the people. How problematic is it, you know, for one of the important members of the OSCE, when you have these problems at home, which make it very difficult, first of all, to do the reporting you want to do, but second of all, to speak openly and intelligently about what's going on inside your own country?
Look, we could spend the next hour talking about those issues. The Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty had its, is almost 100% supported through funding from the United States Congress. We're not government employees. We are an independent nonprofit corporation that receives its funds. Like many other NGOs right now that existences are threatened. We've taken very strong actions in order to continue to survive. We've gone to court against the agency that has withheld our funds. I'm happy to say we continue to win. But one of the more interesting things that happened hours after the US froze our funds back in March, we heard from leaders all around Europe. Radio Free Europe has been headquartered in Europe for 75 years now, 30 years in the Czech Republic, thanks to President Václav Havel. Those principles and the reason that he invited us to the Czech Republic are absolutely vital now. And we had a very simple messages of support that said, we can't let Radio Free Europe die. How can we help? And I will tell you, yes, there's a lot of discussion about our future, but we do have bipartisan support in the United States still. We are still very actively securing funding, or trying to secure funding for the future. And there's a full acknowledgement right now that we need to diversify our sources of funding and recognize that Radio Free Europe is at home in Europe. One of our critics said, we don't need Radio Free Europe anymore. Europe is already free, which my colleagues who are working right now on the front line side by side with the brave defenders in Ukraine had a good chuckle at that one. We need these services right now. We need them to be funded adequately, and we need to work together and recognize that soft power is a very key component to any security measures and defense measures.
That line about, you know, Europe already being free and not needing Radio Free Europe, what I'm just wanting you to explore for just a second is whether you believe that inside the United States itself there are currently issues with free expression, with political repression of sorts, of the use of the law against cultural and media organizations, which suggests that even in, quote unquote, the home of the free, some of the Helsinki principles are at risk right now.
Of course, there are real challenges right now. You see the pressures being put on organizations as strong and as valuable as the Wall Street Journal, CBS News. However, what I'd say is the freedom of expression is very much alive and well when you see what's being done and what's being said. It's a striking contrast. Our journalists are free to ask the President of the United States, the head of the Senate, any question they want. That's completely different than what would happen in Belarus or in Russia. And so, yes, there are challenges right now, but that's not to say that the principles of all this have just completely vanished.
Minister Batmunk, I want to bring you into the conversation now. And as I said at the very beginning, Mongolia is the youngest member of OSCE. I think you joined in 2012. So with regard to this conversation about respect for the principles of OSCE, of the Helsinki Final Act, and the degree to which levels of respect are perhaps not what they were, or perhaps from your point of view, they are. I'd like you to tell me why Mongolia in 2012 made the decision to join. Why were you so keen to be involved in OSCE?
Yes, thank you. My name is also very correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you for your interesting question. Of course, everybody is asking such a question, why you became member of OSCE, very far distance, and this is Asian country. So we really enjoy being a youngest member of OSCE. We became a member in 2012, and Mongolia's accession was both a strategic and principled decision.
Minister, I'm sorry to be so rude, but would you mind, I don't know if it'd be possible to move your microphone a little bit closer to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now it's okay?
I think be as close as you can to the microphone.
Mm-hmm. We see OSCE is a bridge for us to connect West and East, North and South. So Mongolia is independent, free market, young democratic country between two powers. For us, third neighbor policy is one of the important foreign policy pillars. So this mechanism was very interesting for us to build, to make a bridge with all European countries, the members of OSCE.
Has it made a difference, do you believe? Being members of OSCE, has it made a difference in Mongolia to your political culture?
It was very beneficial entering, and still we enjoy the relation with OSCE, and we implemented many projects regarding the human rights issues on election law and empowering women, and gender equality, etc.
And you mentioned, your strategic position, and obviously Mongolia has a hugely strategic position, and you have two global superpowers as neighbors, China and Russia. Russia, of course, also is in the membership of OSCE, but I just wonder whether that strategic positioning you have, it gives you an extra feeling of sort of strength, of connection and network, that you are now part of this multilateral organization.
Yes. Of course, we deal with two of our neighbors very well. We are a totally landlocked country. And as I said previously that we successfully launched our third neighbor policy. We do implement very good policy with all UN member countries. We settled diplomatic relations with all 192 countries. So to balance relation between our neighbors is very important priority of Mongolia. At the same time, balancing relation between the third neighbors. So this international mechanism, especially with OSCE, it's important pillar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you very much. Now, I am going to just start introducing slowly some of the questions that you guys have come up with, and I thank you very much for those who've used the QR code and put in some questions. We've got a few here. Let's start at the top. Do you believe, somebody's asking, do you believe in the notion of the indivisibility of security in Europe? That is, I guess, that the whole organization has to take an overview, and that the insecurity or violation of one of the principles, whether it be, violation of the notion of the inviolability of borders, sovereignty, peaceful commitment to peaceful resolution of conflict. All of those things clearly have been violated in the recent past in Europe. And the question then is how the entire membership must respond. I mean, is there a duty on all members to take a unified stand, for example? Minister Valtonen.
Well, I do believe in the indivisibility of security. I do think that in the spirit of, I guess, Martin Luther King, who said that if you, can't remember exactly the word, but if you, well, have trouble somewhere, then obviously it means trouble back at home as well, and you can't simply ignore it. And I think this is the, I must say, this is the daily work of a foreign minister. So it definitely is part of everyone's agenda too. But it must be, because if we talk about a principled organization, the OSCE, who at the end of the day is there to uphold the principles that we have agreed on, then obviously if there's a blatant violation of one of those or many of those, then together we need to act. But having said this, the CSCE 50 years ago, but neither the OSCE have been formed as organizations or as gatherings of just the like-minded. So actually I think it was even revolutionary 50 years ago that diverse set of countries was able to agree on the Helsinki Final Act, which we still
to be in violation. But what about a sort of punishment mechanism for countries within the membership that are clearly in violation of the spirit, the principles behind the Final Act? I mean, do you just sort of plow on regardless, allowing the membership to continue, or should there be sanctions and punishments for members who clearly are in violation?
Well, the OSCE does not have to take on every single task to itself. Having said this, for the OSCE, and one of the key tasks for the OSCE is to gather evidence for accountability. And for instance, a massive step forward in recent weeks was when we launched this special tribunal for the war of aggression against Ukraine. Not the OSCE, it now came under the Council of Europe. Finland, of course, one of the countries behind it, and we were actually in Lviv in Western Ukraine to basically well, celebrate is not the right word, but put together this initiative. The OSCE can collect evidence on all sorts of war crimes at the scene, and also, of course, what the OSCE, through its missions around, will be able to not just collect evidence on perhaps lesser crimes than the war of aggression or war crimes, say the hampering of the free media or different sorts of instances where the authorities or where the government goes against those principles. And that's fair and good. But again, the OSCE is not an enforcement organization.
It's not, but it has had important monitoring and scrutinizing roles,
yes.
not least, actually, in the period after 2014 on the front lines in eastern Ukraine. I mean, it was supposed to be the organization that was monitoring adherence.
Yeah, and I think rightfully, Andrei has criticism towards the OSCE, and this is something we need to take seriously, and I can tell you we have. But the second thing is that perhaps in that time, the OSCE was mandated with something that the OSCE was not created for and was not in operational, I don't know, duty or ability to take care of.
So I guess the lesson there would be if you take on tasks which you're not really suited for, that risks undermining respect and the standing of the organization. So I guess that... Yeah.
Rightfully. So therefore, also what comes to a possible ceasefire, a possible path towards genuine peace and lasting and fair peace in Ukraine, the OSCE can certainly take on tasks, but we have to be extremely pragmatic.
Indeed.
What it is specifically that we can do.
I do want to squeeze in as many questions as possible, so I'm going to move on at this point just to consider a somewhat different question. This questioner asks, how should participating states, OSCE member states of course, engage with human rights defenders globally? Which I do find an interesting question because, you know, right now we are so very well aware of a massive humanitarian, human rights, international law challenge within the Israel-Palestinian conflict in Gaza, and it's on everybody's minds around the world, whether you're an OSCE member state or not. Stephen Doughty, what do you think the OSCE's role, if any, is in that sort of challenge to international human rights?
I mean, I think fundamentally it creates conditions for us to be able to gather evidence, for us to be able to listen to testimony, for us to be able to understand what is happening. And obviously, we understand how that is going to take place under the Moscow mechanism, again, in relation to Russia's actions against Ukraine. But I think more broadly, you know, I've had the pleasure of working alongside human rights defenders in my career before entering Parliament, and I take a keen interest in that very direct testimony, that very, very clear evidence that often they provide, and often sometimes that the world isn't hearing. I mean, you only have to look outside of Europe to what's happening in Sudan at the moment, or what's happening in many other contexts around the world where it's absolutely crucial that the voice of those who are being affected, particularly, for example, women and girls who are victims of sexual violence or others, that those voices are heard, that we're able to gather evidence, and that we're able to allow the relevant bodies, whether that's the ICC or the ICJ or you know, discussions in the UN Human Rights Council, to be able to take action and to be able to come to conclusions on that. But certainly I can say in my role as a minister in the UK, I am regularly meeting with and regularly listening to groups, often discreetly, often in private, but whose testimony is absolutely crucial to understanding the situation in any one of the contexts that we face globally. And I think the OSCE has a particularly important role when looking at, for example, the rights of minorities within Europe, whether it's the freedom of journalists, and whether it's going back to those fundamental principles in the Helsinki Final Act around equalities, around respect, around the basic principles of human rights that are under threat in many locations and many different contexts.
But I suppose, to put it bluntly, is it the role of the OSCE primarily, you know, to ensure its own house is in order, or should the OSCE be outward-looking, internationally focused as well when it comes to, you know, defending human rights and human rights defenders around the globe?
Well, I think the OSCE can set an example in other contexts. Fundamentally, it has to remain focused on our area and what's going on in the members, and crucially that we're all holding each other to account and speaking truth about what is happening. And that's why it's so crucial that we speak that truth about what's happening, whether that's in Ukraine or indeed in, you know, currently in Georgia, for example, and where we're seeing a complete rollback of civic freedoms and repression. And we've spoken out very clearly on that as the UK.
Yeah. Now, let's move on to another question here, which is how can institutions support young people in innovating solutions that absolutely uphold and support core OSCE values? So I'm really interested in this, drawing in and engaging young people, because as I said at the very beginning, you know, part of the OSCE mission is very much people to people. It's not all about what states can do, it's how you can really reach people and convince them of the importance of the spirit and the principles behind Helsinki. So actually, let's go to Mongolia, if you don't mind, Minister. How do you engage young Mongolians with, you know, the spirit and the principles behind Helsinki?
Yeah, you know, Mongolian youth are very active and very Western-oriented. We did an amendment in our law of education 2 years ago to become English language as a second foreign language. So many Mongolian young people trying to study in Western countries and very interested in politics. In this complex world, modern Mongolian young people wants to be very active and even in the world arena. So as with the in the future, the young generation, you know, I think more smart and clever than us. They can easily obtain all knowledge, all information, and they wish to be true world, everything very practical, and want to be more peaceful and to cooperate with more countries as possible. So we have to open the way for them, to open the door wider for them, to feel free, to feel more independent.
In terms of openness, are you finding a lot of young people now are going to study abroad? Do you encourage young people to go study abroad, to pick up ideas abroad, bring them back to Mongolia? How do you go about encouraging that open mindset?
You know, we are quite different from two of neighbors. The system, political system, the media, the information they got, the way of thinking. We were always independent with this is the country of young people, 70% of our population under 45 years old, and very free-minded people. So we use all international media platform, all media is open for our young people, so there is no any, I would say, challenges to get to the world.
I want to now, if I may, ask you a question which struck me when I was reading back through the history of 1975 and the Final Act and the careful language used. The messaging around the Helsinki Final Act was very much about freedom rather than democracy, because of course, you know, the whole point was to build bridges across the Iron Curtain to states under the Soviet system, which were patently not democratic in any way that we in the West would have ever recognized. But, you know, the point was not to make a big deal of that. It was to stress individual freedoms, rights, rather than bang on about democracy. I wonder how, panel, you feel about that today. How important is democracy itself? Minister Smyhab, if I may get your thoughts on that. I mean, you in Ukraine, you have built...
We had three revolutions. Revolution of dignity, Orange Revolution, to protect values of democracy. These values for us are not just empty words. We understand that freedom is a essential part, a fundamental part of democracy. And with your permission, I would like to reflect to your question with regard of indivisibility. I am confident that Ukrainian security and European security, they are indivisible. That it also means collective responsibility, strong response. You mentioned sanctions. Yes, sometimes we need force someone to follow standards. That's our lesson learned. So what do I mean? Strong sanctions, isolation, and accountability. Accountability, it's also a strong tool to achieve goals of final act. By the way, let us agree that it was not a final act. History has never ended. Not after Helsinki, not after the Berlin Wall fallen. And probably altogether we are writing now our history. And the main ink for European history now, the blood of my compatriots, of Ukrainian people.
That's a very powerful way of putting it, and I don't think anybody in this room would quarrel with the idea that what you are doing in Ukraine, the fight you are fighting, is clearly a fight for freedom that goes far beyond the borders of Ukraine, and that people around Europe and around the world watch and feel, in a sense, is about their own freedoms as it is about yours. I do understand all of that, but I want to ask you a more difficult...
choice, also a possibility to have a right to choose. That's also a part of our freedom, a part of democracy. All these 10 principles, they are in our DNA.
But I want to ask you perhaps a more difficult question. I mean, in recent days, we've seen your parliament and then the president sign off on a change in the law which, to many people, undermines the independence of key anti-corruption institutions. It questions, you know, your government's commitment to transparency, to accountability, key elements of the relationship between the citizen and the government, which, you know, again, relates to the principles and the spirit of Helsinki, where the rights of the individual citizen are paramount. Is it possible at a time that you're living through of war, total war, is it possible, do you believe, to still be true to the spirit of Helsinki in all of its detail?
Yes, definitely, but why do you think it is a difficult question? That's also about democracy. We have difficult situation. We have Russian brutal aggression, but we are committed to the reforms. Of course, we are hearing the reaction of our society. Of course, we are hearing the reaction of our international partners, but we are committed to for the fight with corruption. That's our national interest. And because of security concerns, because of necessity to keep balance, I mean security concerns, fight with the corruption, influence of Russia on some bodies, this bill was initiated, and by the way, we expect that this bill will be approved today in our parliament. So that's a part of the democratic process.
We are short of time. We've only got 5 or 6 minutes left, and a couple of questions prompt me to ask all of you on the panel, you know, in perhaps the last phase of this discussion, to think about the future and how the OSCE needs to sort of evolve to combat and to meet the challenges that aren't necessarily all about security in the traditional sense, but raise new collective challenges. One question is this: the climate crisis is a big security risk. Should OSCE be doing more, like the OSCE and other security organizations, do more to tackle it? And I'm going to actually look at the next question as well, because it's related. How can the OSCE strengthen resilience while upholding transparency, as we've just discussed, civil liberties and public trust, in an era of disinformation and hybrid threats? So you've got a climate challenge, you've got a challenge that comes with, you know, all of the information technologies we've got, which includes, you know, capacities for cyber threats, for artificial intelligence to present disinformation challenges. How is the OSCE going to evolve to meaningfully play a role in meeting these collective challenges? I'm going to have all of you think about this, starting with you, Minister Valtonen.
Yeah, well, thank you. Obviously, environmental security is a significant part of comprehensive security and the resilience of societies. But to keep it short, and the OSCE is actually doing a lot in this regard, and also what comes to tackling hybrid threats, which increasingly are targeting, for instance, elections around Europe. So the OSCE is doing as much as it only can. But also we need to understand that the OSCE is constrained also by a budget and money. We live in a world which has to prioritize. We haven't had a budget approved since 21, right? So we have to balance different expectations against the realism of what we really can do.
Which sort of brings us back to whether the OSCE is in crisis, but I've asked you that already and you dealt with that, so we won't go back into that. But I guess what it points to is that when key members of the OSCE, whether it be Russia or indeed the United States, thinking about the US in particular in relation to climate change, when they have a particularly strong take, which isn't necessarily the take that many of the membership has, again, you've got a profound problem in developing a coherent message.
Mm-hmm. And exactly for that reason, I think, well, two paths to think about this. Well, first of all, the OSCE is a consensus-based organization. So essentially the reason that we are in a crisis, you might say, is that
those organizations work at the moment, consensus-based organizations, when there's so little international consensus?
Barely, but the OSCE does work and still is able to carry out important work. And precisely also for this reason, well, we are, well, the Secretary General and the Secretariat is making all in its effort to have the budget approved, plus also we will today announce the Helsinki Plus 50 fund, which will aid in funding fundamental projects such as aiding Ukraine without consensus. And the second thing is also what we need to really think about today, since the world has changed, and in many ways for the better. Quite many tasks that the OSCE has done in the past 30 years is now being carried out by also other organizations. Say the European Union is, for instance, is extremely active also in countries in candidating towards the European Union, also observing elections and all sorts. So we need to focus and prioritize and carry out those tasks that only the OSCE can effectively take care of.
Minister Sybiha, I'd just like your thoughts on the next phase of the OSCE's life and whether you see it as evolving to remain meaningful.
My point of view, it is important to provide OSCE with the capacity to properly react in advance, to have the capacity to prevent something. I totally support Elena with an approach to change this consensus-based decision-making process. We should not allow to some countries which are violating the principles of OSCE to abuse their veto right. Also to have the right to eliminate them from the OSCE.
You think going forward, there will need to be a mechanism for ejecting members?
Yes. So we need to make OSCE more functional. And we as a country, we have concrete 5 steps based on our also negative experience, how to make amendments and to make this organization more efficient. So we need reforms, we need structural changes.
I suspect people will discuss that over lunch and far beyond. Thank you for that thought. Yeah, Mr. Doughty, give us your thought on some of the new challenges and very briefly whether you see the OSCE as an organization capable of evolving and meeting new challenges.
Absolutely, I do, and the organisation has evolved and developed over the last 50 years. But I mean, and obviously, climate change and the climate crisis and energy security are absolutely crucial to the UK. They're at the heart of our government's plan, and obviously there is an important interlinkage with security there. But on the second question, I think this is one of the most fundamental threats to democracy, to freedom, and to the very principles that are in the Decalogue. We don't need to change the 10. But we do need to think about how they're interpreted and how there are threats to them in that new, particularly the information, cyber and hybrid challenges.
You could probably throw in the mass movement of peoples as well.
Absolutely. And look, we've got a lot of different challenges to our security, and again, those are huge priorities for us. But the particular threats that we see in the hybrid attacks, when you look at what Russia is not just doing conventionally to Ukraine in a devastating way, but what it's doing to destabilise democracy, society across the OSCE area, whether it's in Moldova, whether it's in the Caucasus, whether it's in the Balkans. We need to understand what is happening, build up resilience in societies, and governments working together and understanding those threats. So, for example, the work that the OSCE does on election monitoring needs to obviously take account of those new threats and the ways in which quite blatant attempts are being made to undermine democratic processes in all of our societies, including, in every part of the OSCE region. So we want to work very closely as the UK with countries to build up that resilience and to expose the threats and where they're coming from.
Well, in terms of misinformation and the whole information landscape, Stephen, you've got an important role to play. I mean, you've got your own fight to fight at the moment because you've got to make sure that Radio Free Europe survives. But leave aside your own battles, the battle to maintain a sort of a free and trust-based information landscape. Do you think the OSCE has got a meaningful role to play in that?
I'd say is I think OSCE has a vested interest in seeing us survive. We are programming.
You mean as Radio Free Europe?
Radio Free Europe survival I think is essential for anybody who's committed to democracy, freedom. We are operating in 23 different countries, 27 different languages. 19 of those countries are OSCE states. All the issues that are on there about the future, strengthening resiliency while upholding transparency, civil liberties, public trust, climate. One of our journalists is in prison in Azerbaijan, was thrown into prison 1 year ago right before the big climate conference. He's an economist. This is how much of a threat nations like Azerbaijan and others feel about this. And in Ukraine, we're doing documentaries that are documenting the atrocities that are absolutely war crimes in many cases, but we're also keeping a very close watch on anti-corruption measures. It's the complete picture. And I actually think any healthy society needs a commitment to that. And so we need to win. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty needs to survive. Russia and China and Iran are already prematurely celebrating our demise. I want to prove them wrong. We need the collective support, though, in order to get through this.
Well, you certainly made a strong pitch, so thank you very much for that, Stephen. And Minister Batmunke, if I can end with you and your thoughts about the ability of the OSCE to meet new challenges, as well as, of course, continue to focus on core security issues, which are part of its DNA.
Yes, now we are in the transitional period, I think. The world is changing. We are moving forward with the new order. So we must end the war, and all member states facing these challenges. I think especially the hybrid threats, that's our main challenge. So EC should determine the exactly current situation, to study all kinds of threats, all kinds of challenges, and invest more on solving these problems, especially the hybrid threats.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I was told that Finns are extraordinarily passionate about being punctual. And I'm deep into the red zone with the timer here, so forgive me for that. But this discussion has been fascinating to me, and we've got different voices, different perspectives. I wanted everybody to have a fair shake. I must stop talking now because you guys all deserve lunch. But before you go, please give our panel the very warmest applause. Thank you so much, panel. And we'll remain here for a second. I think Mikko might want to come back just to tell you exactly about lunch arrangements. I don't know if Mikko is here. But if he doesn't want to come back, then I will simply tell you lunch is served, and we'll see you all this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Mikko, you are here. There you are.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much. Well done. Thank you. Let's give one round of applause for the great panel and great moderator.
Thank you very much. Oh, Minister, thank you very much. Well, it's a pleasure to see you. I wish we would have more time to talk one-on-one.
I invite you to the area right outside of this main hall where a buffet lunch will be served. I also encourage you to attend the side events that the civil society actors are organizing in the area. The program here in the main hall will continue at 1:45 p.m. sharp, and I encourage you to be back here 5 to 10 minutes in advance. Thank you. and enjoy the lunch.